Good morning and afternoon, and welcome everybody to today's webinar on Cambodia, on trafficked brides, the escalating phenomenon of forced marriage to China, which is coordinated by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. I'm Lucia Bird, one of the co-authors of the GI report that we will launch as part of today's webinar. And I'm the director of the Global Initiative's Observatory of Illicit Economies in West Africa. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today for this really important discussion. Just a few housekeeping points before we kick off today's conversation. Please stay on mute throughout, unless you're a speaker. There will be time for Q&A after the speakers have presented their points. We will not be taking questions between each speakers, but instead we'll group all questions at the end. Please do post your questions in the chat, either directed to a specific speaker or to the panel as a whole. Please feel free to post your questions as they occur to you while the speakers are presenting, and please do include your name and your organisation when you post the question, and I will direct the questions to the speakers after the final presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and live streamed. With these points covered, we can begin the substantive discussion today, which is on a really crucial topic: the trafficking of women to China for marriage. Thousands of women and girls from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Nepal, North Korea, Pakistan, and Myanmar are transported to China to wed Chinese men. Some, of course, travel in the knowledge that they are to be married. Others are deceived and travel on other pretexts. Similarly, although some of these women and girls do end up happily married, many report suffering violence, sexual abuse, and forced labour. A wide range of stakeholders, both from governments as well as individuals and organisations as part of civil society who work directly with women who have been trafficked to China for marriage, report that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and in some regions driven an increase in bride trafficking to China. As you will hear from some of our speakers, the practice is driven by demand in China linked to a gender imbalance in the country. This imbalance will remain the case for a number of years, meaning the demand will continue to be high and women will continue to be trafficked into China for marriage. It is therefore key that stakeholders better understand this trafficking phenomenon and craft strong responses to address it. And we have a brilliant panel of speakers today to start moving the conversation forwards. And I will now briefly introduce these speakers. So if you could come on video, please. Firstly, we have Thi Huang, who is an analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime and managing editor of the Journal of Illicit Economies and Development. Thi is an expert on human trafficking with a specific focus on migrant workers' vulnerabilities and the role of technology in human trafficking. We have also with us Virak Chung, who co-authored the GI study on bride trafficking from Cambodia to China, who is a consultant, a non-paying international consultants company, and has conducted a wide range of research into human rights and development issues such as human trafficking, migration, women's rights, children's rights, and gender equality and urban development in the region, and also particularly in Cambodia. We are also very pleased to be joined today by Mr. Chan Saron, Senior Programme Manager of Survivor Restoration at the Chab Dai Coalition. Chan has been working on cross-border trafficking cases and with anti-human trafficking police on investigations for 13 years. And Chab Dai works directly with survivors of trafficking persons in Cambodia, including women who have been trafficked into marriage in China. We also have with us Leti Hong Luang, the anti-trafficking coordinator at Blue Dragon Children's Foundation, where Luang works with hundreds of victims of labour and sex trafficking, again, including women who have been trafficked to China for marriage. Luang is intricately engaged with the trafficking situation in Vietnam, where she has researched and written numerous reports and regularly speaks to international media. Blue Dragon has a long-standing relationship with the Global Initiative and is one of the Global Initiative's Resilience Programme partners. Finally, We have with us Sean Sok Pai, who has wide-ranging experience working on trafficking in Southeast Asia. In 2010, Pai led a team of 11 NGOs to successfully advocate for a free child helpline phone for children, and Pai is now working as the Executive Director at Child Helpline Cambodia. Pai was also one of the Resilience Fellows of the Global Initiative's Resilience Fellowship Programme, and an absolutely pivotal element of the design, the creation, and each step of the GI's research into this area. So Pai, I hand over to you for opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pai. I'm working with Child Helpline Cambodia and one of the fellow with the Global Initiative for Global Initiative on transnational organized crime since 2010. Yeah, our colleague and team have an idea to conduct a research on the trafficking in Cambodian women and girls to China, especially focusing on forced marriage. And the work has been conducted, since late 2020, at which time we were in the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So because the study is also based on the 10-year case management system of Child Helpline Cambodia. So our team are quite occupied in terms of the timing. One time is our team, the frontline counselor, working to answer lots of calls during the COVID-19 pandemic, because at the time a lot of people in Cambodia are in the lockdown period and increasing call into the helpline. So on the one hand, we are dealing with lots of case management system, the data to provide to the researcher team, and at the same time we are answering the telephone from different people, including children, young people, and also the victim per se, from China and from Malaysia, etc. To provide support, emotional support, and connecting to the essential services during the lockdown. Today, I'm quite happy that we come to a launching event of our research study on forced marriage of Cambodian women and girls to China. So I hope today our researcher could make a great presentation to share the finding and recommendation for policymaker, for government official, for NGO, and service provider, in order that we can work together to stop human trafficking, not only just the Cambodian women, but also Cambodian women, women and girls from other countries and beyond Southeast Asia, to China or to other countries. And I wish everyone a success, presentation today. Lucia, back to you.
Thank you very much, Pai, and thank you for driving the study forward and really conceptualizing it. And as Pai underscored, it really was driven by a need identified through Child Cambodia Helpline. So now, without further ado, I will hand over to T and to Viriak, who will take us through some of the key findings from the report that we are launching today, which is Cambodia's Trafficked Brides, the Escalating Phenomenon of Forced Marriage to China. As you can see in the chat, the report is available on the GI's website, so we really do encourage you to go and explore this after today's session. T, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucia. So as Lucia mentioned, our research has been driven by the need for the most recent research looking into the phenomena, because according to our the interviewees and the sources that we have spoken to, the number of women and girls traveling from Cambodia to China for forced or arranged marriages has surged since 2016, and most recently experienced a further spike since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in the first quarter of 2020. So this was the main, the central topic of the research study that we are launching today. This is to give an outline or overview of our presentation today. First, I would briefly speak about the study background, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Virak for the dynamics of the underground bride economy. And then I'll be back with the COVID-19 impacts that we have observed during especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And then I'll present some of the recommendations from the researchers or the authors to the wider public, especially to the Cambodian law enforcement and authorities or response system. As for the background of the study, before we launch into the research findings, a key point here to highlight is the study was commissioned, designed, and implemented in partnership with Child Helpline Cambodia, which is run by PAI. And Child Helpline Cambodia is a free service for youth and children in Cambodia, which receives trafficking reports from the callers to the helpline. So PAI spearheaded the establishment of the Child Helpline, which now receives over 1,000 calls a month from children and youth across Cambodia. He was also, as Lucia mentioned, one of our Global Initiative Resilience Fund Fellow in 2020. And here on the slide, you could see the link to our Resilience Fund in case you are interested in exploring further. So it's resilienceFund.globalinitiative.net. A number of the helpline callers to PAI's helpline reported situations that, identified as constituting context of trafficking. So PAI and the Global Initiative collaborated to better understand some of the trafficking dynamics experienced by the helplines. And also we identify that the pandemic brought significant disruption to the research. We not identify, but we experienced some of the limitations because of the pandemic, because it prevented some of our planned field work to Cambodia, which is the source province that we will present later on. And also we needed to shift some of our interviews, in-person interviews, to the online Zoom environment. And that was one of the limitations. We also couldn't interview a lot of stakeholders in China or Vietnam. Therefore, further research into this would be needed in the future in order to have a better understanding of the issues. This research was also shaped by the needs of the child helplines, not only the child helpline Cambodia, but also the survivors and victims who are using or who have used the service. At the center of the research and also the focus of our study are the voices of the families and victims of trafficking, especially the helpline callers. It is also worth noting that Child Helpline Cambodia received calls pointing to a range of various trafficking contexts, or, for example, issues regarding violence against children and youth. However, our research particularly focused on bride trafficking to China because this was identified and highlighted by the interviewed stakeholders as the fastest growing trafficking phenomenon. So by both government officials and civil society actors, particularly following the onset of the pandemic. And also many people noted that there has been a significant gap in the understanding of this trafficking phenomena. Next, we are going to the dynamics of the underground bride economy, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague Virak for this. Virak, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, T. And then good afternoon, good morning, participants and panelists. For great to join all together. So, without the delay, I just start with the dynamic of the bride trafficking from Cambodia to China. So, with all the trafficking context, bride trafficking to China is driven by the demand. How and could the demand in China contribute to the bride trafficking in Cambodia to China? While trafficker about trafficking of women and girls from South Asia for marriage in China, that back to the 1980s, women and girls from South Asia for marriage in China, it significantly increased in the early of the 2000s. And this increase can be likely attributed to the China one child policy. Participant and ladies and gentlemen would already heard about the China one child policy, which enforced between 1975 and 1979 and 2015. So the policy led to sex-selective abortion by many family which wanting to have a son instead of a daughter. So this creating a significant gender imbalance and subsequent shortage of female to marry in China. So only many of the men with the have the son instead of daughter. And according to the 7 National Population Center in 2020, the number of male inhabited living in China was 723 million, while female inhabited only 688 million. So the number of male and the number of the female, meaning about like 35 million imbalance between men and female in China. To give a sense of how significant that is, it is more doubt, like more than double Cambodian total population, which is only 16 million population in Cambodia in 2019. So this high demand for female partner and wives, and this is because of the imbalance result in high demand of female and male, female partner and wife, especially from Chinese men in the poor rural area in the south of the China. Example in the province of Nanning, Guangzhou, Xinjiang. Sorry if I pronounce the wrong name of the Chinese provinces. And this demand is being met by the importation of female and girls from the region, mostly from the South Asia, for married to Chinese men, and some context constituting the form of trafficking. So, and the high demand have also driven a surge in the price of dowry in China. According to the Chinese media, by 2021, about like $20,000 was at the lower threshold of the payment made, with average between $30,000 and $40,000. In some rural area in China, this point to a tenfold increase since 2010, and sky-high dowry have meant that it is often cheaper for the groom family to pay an agent for an overseas bride, whether willing or otherwise, than to find and marry with the Chinese women. So, ladies and gentlemen, although the fee payable to Chinese agent for the overseas bride have increased from $10,000 to $20,000 in 2016 to up to $25,000 in 2020. So according to the report, the reported remain lower than average dowry for Chinese wives. So falling demand for overseas brides. The increase in payment due to agent for overseas bride have also made the bride market an increasingly profitable one for the broker and the trafficker. So I will present more about the profile of the trafficker in later on, but let's move to the victim profile and the source of province in Cambodia, who are the including male, female and girl who are the victim for the bride trafficking or marriage trafficking. So mostly it's Cambodian women and girls who are smuggler or trafficked to China for marriage are typical vulnerable socio-economic status and from the very rural area, mostly not from the urban area, but they are from the poor community and very far, very rural. And historically, most women smuggler or trafficker to China for marriage were in their later 10s or 20s. However, a number of CSO noted that increased prevalence of the minor, very young, including girls as young as 11 years old, so very young. And organization GI-TOC coalitions, an anti-trafficking CSO in operate in Phnom Penh, and they have many target area in the province. So reported that since 2020, they received many cases of the victim age 14 to 16, so young, very young. Right? So GI-TOC noted that the age range from a target for marriage in China was widened overall, with the growing number of significant also the older women, so being targeted by the brokers in 2018. So meaning not only targeted very young girl, but also targeted the oldest. And they attributed this to growing awareness rate regarding the risk of being recruited for marriage in China, forcing recruiter to amplify the target age range to meet the demand of the Chinese men and the families. While bride trafficking to China occur from all Cambodian provinces, but Kampong Cham is like identified as the most common point of the origin, like identified by many stakeholders and also the media, like also the Little Review and the press media in Cambodia also identified that Kampong Cham is the most common point of the origin. And bride trafficking target a number of regions in China, but also particularly in the poorest rural area in the south, like I mentioned before, in the south in China. And the destination province in China, based on our press review and also the interview with the stakeholder, include Nanning, Henan, Xiangji, and also the Guangzhou and Xinjiang. So, however, many survivors are unsure of where they were taken to China, because when they are trafficked to China, they are not sure that maybe in a rural area or in the urban area or in other city, because of they may know different name of the place they are trafficked to. So, and let's move to the profile of the broker and trafficker. I didn't show the photo, like not the same as the Facebook profile, but the general profile or common profile of the broker and the trafficker. But before moving to the profile, let's take a quick look about the discussing about the note on the terminologies. So the term broker and trafficker are often used interchangeably, which risk blurring the line between arranged marriage and trafficking. So very changeable. Whether the victim, sometimes they call broker and sometimes they call like trafficker. Also the civil society organization also do not make the differences between broker and trafficker, and it changes all the time. And the term broker, meaning the intermediary who do not intend to exploit client, meaning do not intend to exploit the victim, but with the relationship is more of the transactional or personal nature. And about the trafficker, they have the intent to traffic the person using one of the means of the outline in the trafficking protocol, meaning Palermo protocol that participants would already know about the protocol. And these distinctions can be blurry, especially when the broker role morph into that trafficker. Sometimes they change their role. Broker become trafficker, and trafficker should be hide themselves as the broker. So something like this. And several separation and interconnected agents involved in each state of the journey of the traffic. How about the recruiter? And recruiter is identified as the broker or trafficker. So typically is the depend on the interview and the review. That's review. Typically is Cambodian women. So they are very technical in recruit the Cambodian girl and women to married with the Chinese. And sometimes they not sometimes, but mostly they are from the same community, meaning they know each other. Sometimes know very well, and sometimes know just only know. And the same community, the same village, and also said the same disadvantage from the poor household and poor economic background, and their traffic. Sometimes they are a traffic victim. Some are married to Chinese men already, so they are become expert of the being a wife of Chinese men, and then they come to village to persuade or to recruit more women to marry with the other Chinese. And while network appear to be relevant, so some are not fully aware of the legal consequences and legally of the actions marriage brokering or is illegal in Cambodia, because sometimes they don't know that this is the illegal, or do not know how the biggest challenges of the legal consequences. The number two is about the transporter. Typically, is the nationality of the relevant transit country, mostly and commonly is in Vietnam. And the third part is about the marriage interabilities. So most commonly is Chinese nathan. They are at mostly in the destination country like China. So often meet the women upon arrival in the China, and tasked with providing women with accommodation while waiting, contacting prospective husband, and negotiate for the bride of the women. So how much, something like this. So this is the profile of the broker or trafficker. So they are very, very great, and they know very well how to persuade. Or so about the recruitment strategy, traffickers use a range of strategies to recruit Cambodian women and girls to travel to China. A common approach is the recruiter is promote, they use the promoting strategy, promise with Cambodian women and girls to provide a job in China with a significant salary, very high compared to Cambodia, typically of the $500 to $3,000 per month. So it's quite very high, right? And some are told they need marriage certificate in order to access labor market and well paid in China, which is not real, right? That we need to marry and that you get marriage certificate, and then you can access to the high salary labor market in China. And some traffickers were seen waiting outside the outside the factory, and to persuade a women, the girl working in factory, to go to China with them. And traffickers also use the social media platform like WeChat, like Facebook, to advertise a fraudulent job opportunity to Cambodia women and girls. So they are very attractive. And other strategies, including promise a good marriage and better life in China, where recruiter promoted the family with the bride to be a dowry bride, typically between 1,000 to $3,000, which is noted previously, so increasing high payment. And some are also strict and sold by their family member, relatives, and some people for the lump sum price. And payment was made either at the point of recruitment in the village, or at the point of the marriage in China, or at a point, sometime at a point in the transit point. So let's move to the last presentation slide from me. So the traffic route that the trafficker and broker use to transport the victim until they reach China. So back then, the trend, dynamic, and route for women and girls traveling from Cambodia to China married have changed over time, shifting between land and air routes in line with the changing enforcement practice also in Cambodia, China, or as well as in Vietnam. So between, you see the graphics, in between 2010 to 2016, land routed by a transit country, mostly commonly Vietnam, were prevalent. However, growing enforcement at Vietnam land border and decreasing price for air travel. So they drove the growing proportion of Cambodia women to fly, not to walk. not to use land, but to fly, typically from Phnom Penh to Shanghai or to Guangzhou in China. And during this period, a Chinese man also traveled to Cambodia to find a wife, to find a Cambodian women. However, this declined after 2016, and particularly in 2018, regulation require foreign men, especially like if you're talking about China. So China need to pay if they want to return their home country with the wife of the Cambodian women. To bring Cambodian women, they need to pay. And from 2016 onward, due to the growing report of women being trafficked from Cambodia to China by air, the Chinese embassy in Cambodia reportedly restrict travel visa issue to Cambodian women, while at the same time, the Cambodian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation enhanced consular screening method. So they have changed, like I said before, they changed the restriction. And this have led to an increase in traveling overland again, like change from time to time, and transit Vietnam through the informal route, either crossing border or while they are like corrupted with the border official, increasing using irregular migration channel to enter China, such as by swimming across the river or walking through the jungle. So in the case of 2021, overland route transit Vietnam remain the most common because Cambodian women and girls smuggled to traffic to China. And one in Vietnam, some broker obtained Chinese travel visa for Cambodia who enter China by air. So they get a visa, not in Cambodia, but in China. So some women and girls complete the overland, like they work on overland, crossing the border at the informal entrance point. For example, include a Cambodian women travel overland from Siem Reap by bus to the border of the Vietnam, and they walk like to Sa, China without identity document. So she walks through the jungle to cross the border between Vietnam and China. Take time like a month to reach China. So, and one development which we would like to highlight because it might have a high impact on the development and dynamic of the issue in 2017, China began the construction of the tall fence equipped with the video camera, light and movement detector along China's southern border with Vietnam and Myanmar. So this construction was reportedly accelerated since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, and is nearly completion along the border with Vietnam and received little media attention. So as consequence, while the full impact of the fence remains unclear, it is unlikely to disrupt overland route and could try to return to the use of the official border crossing or to the renew use the air route. Either friend would hire the need for travel document, either forged or using the tourist visa. So thank you so much. So let's move back to T.
Thank you very much, Virek. So let us move to the coercion tactics used by the traffickers as well as their exploitation dynamics. So here in this graphics, you could see that the whole precarious journey of the trafficked victims of Cambodian women and girls in China for forced marriage. They have what they have to go through. Even though violence can occur at every stage of the journey, it is most commonly reported when the women were forced to marry the prospective husband within the context of the marriage itself. So usually recruiters will provide financing for the whole journey to China. They would initially cover the cost of procuring documents, travel papers, accommodation, and so forth. Because of this, some traffickers use the money that they have invested in, the victims, bringing the victims to China, as the debts incurred by the victims, and use them as one of the threat mechanisms to ensure that the victims would obey and marry the prospective Chinese husband. So many Cambodian women traveling to China for arranged marriage also often enter on a 1-month tourist visa. Usually marriages are then arranged or forced within this 1-month period. Why women and girls where they refuse to marry, then the traffickers would threaten to denounce the victims illegal or imminently illegal status to the police, threaten them that they would be deported back to China. At the same time, they would be demanded that they have to repay the travel costs and also, visa documents costs that the traffickers have taken or invested in. Or the women also reported that traffickers use violence and abuse to force them to marry, or they would threaten the women that they would be sold to brothels if they didn't agree. So once they are married, the women's movement is typically restricted. Their mobile phones will be taken away and they would be prohibited to leave the house unaccompanied. They also prohibited to make any contacts with friends and relatives back in Cambodia. Some stakeholders that we interviewed also noted that the women often find themselves in repeated cycles of forced marriage, meaning that they are taken away from their first husband and children and then forced to marry the second man. And as soon as they deliver or give birth to baby boys or so, they would then be again taken by traffickers to another arranged marriage. Concerning the returnee brides, or how the women could escape and be reintegrated back in their communities in China, this is quite interesting that many of them reportedly use social media to ask for help. So such as Facebook or WeChat, usually they would contact their family members, the Cambodian government authorities, or any other help and support they could find, like consulates, Cambodian consulates or embassies in China. They often post statuses, photos, or videos and messages about their situation. One example include, as you could see on the left-hand side here, a woman reported that her daughter used WeChat in August 2020 to gain support and make plea for help. She wrote in WeChat about her story and how she was deceived and trafficked by the broker in China, as well as that she gave the family address back home in Cambodia. She posted it on Facebook, no, on WeChat, and then the authorities came to her house in Cambodia, and her mom could then file a complaint in the case with the police. This case was a successful story in the end, that she was rescued and returned to Cambodia, and at the moment she's working with a CSO, civil society organization in Phnom Penh. However, the challenges remain. The Chinese police have been reported to return escapees to their husband family and advise women to address the domestic grievances, so they don't treat the case as a human trafficking case, but rather as a domestic case where the husband and wives, they don't get along. In other cases, the Chinese police also detain Cambodian trafficked victims for periods of between 3 months to 1 year because they overstayed their visa or they couldn't provide legal identity or legal residence permits upon inspection, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, where Chinese police were reported to increase their inspection, going from house to house in the southern part of China to check on people's legal document. And following the detention, the victims then often deported back to their last country of transit. In this case, it is Vietnam, and usually they deported together in huge groups with other irregular migrants without proper screening, therefore making it really difficult for the law enforcement or officials to identify traffic victims. In Vietnam, unfortunately, there is no available regulatory framework for the provisions of support to foreign victims trafficked through Vietnam. Therefore, NGOs in Vietnam such as Blue Dragon, they often have to provide emergency support to these victims using their own financial means of funds. So this support include accommodation and food during the investigation, which can last from days to months. And thus the challenges remain that there are patchy support from authorities in China and Vietnam. Also, there has been a significant reliance on NGO support in facilitating and financing the returns of the victims. Concerning the key highlight of the report on the COVID-19 impacts that we have observed and noticed throughout fieldwork and interviews with stakeholders, that many both government officials and NGOs reported an increase in bride trafficking from Cambodia to China since the beginning of the pandemic. There has been also increased vulnerabilities of Cambodian women and girls to being trafficked for forced marriage because of the loss of their income and livelihoods, especially in sectors which employ many women like hospitality and tourism. And then to the enhancing the response system, with regard to our recommendations for Cambodian stakeholders, for example, we recommend at the Cambodian diplomatic missions in China that they would establish and allocate more resources to strengthen the support to assist Cambodian victims, because it has been often reported that there's been lack of resources from the diplomatic mission side. Also, the staff, the officials, the diplomats are recommended to be trained on the issues and how to give proper support to trafficked victims. Between China and Cambodia, we recommend establishment of a clear legal migration pathway for marriage, because often women and girls, they have to go on such illegal or be smuggled into China because there is the lack of legal pathway. Therefore, they are highly susceptible to abuse and violence. And also currently marriage brokerage service are unlawful in Cambodia. However, we would recommend that these are being regulated and also monitored to enable greater visibility on these activities. In Cambodia, we also recommend increased awareness raising initiatives, briefing the women and girls from vulnerable communities on the risk of being trafficked for forced marriage in China, and usually that they should know that if the promise the job offers are giving unrealistic promise, for example, high salaries for unskilled jobs, then this is quite likely false promises. Also, that the men that they are looking to marry, they are often not from a wealthy family or background, but rather from, also low socioeconomic backgrounds from rural parts of southern China, for example. On strengthening the criminal justice and process for human trafficking, we also give a few recommendations, such as shortening the judicial process to make it less of a burden for traffic victims who often come from low economic social backgrounds, as well as strengthening the breast coverage of human trafficking dynamics in Cambodian. This is a very important point, because currently we have observed there is a lack of understanding of the trafficking phenomena by journalists. Therefore, this hampers effective coverage of human trafficking dynamics in Cambodia and create a culture of silence, which is not conducive to awareness raising or prevention and detection of the issues. And with this, I conclude our presentation, and please go to our website to read more about the phenomenon. I think my colleague Claudio posted in the chat the link. So we are also happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, and I'll give the floor back to Lucia.
Thank you very much, T. Viriak, for a run through some of the key findings of the recent research into this really important phenomenon. We can already see lots of questions coming in through the chat, which is great. Please use the chat or the Q&A function to share your questions, and we will post them to the speakers after the last speaker has finished presenting. So without further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Chan Saron of the Chab Dai Coalition in Phnom Penh to share some insights and perspectives from Chab Dai's work.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, thanks so much for giving me time for a short presentation of Chab Dai. I'm sorry for my computer. I also has a technical issue for camera, so that I cannot open the camera. So thanks so much for the research finding on forced marriage case to China. As you has been, for next slide, please. For next slide, yes. You can see the growing demand for international pride in China has created an emerging market for traffickers in the region. Cambodian women eager to escape the impoverished lives in rural village as entering the broker marriage to Chinese men in the hope of more lucrative lives. In reality, many women find themselves deceived about their new living condition, with many resettled in rural China forced to work on farm or domestic helper with the same experiencing abuse that the hand of their husband. And other women are recruited for factory job and find themselves forced into the marriage. You can see this is why the growing demand of pride, international pride, because the one child, one policy for China also has imbalancing between the men and women. That is one of the impact that the China's men are needed the international pride, especially every years the Cambodian woman has been trafficked to China since this year. Chab Dai also worked more than 100 cases that for marriage case to China, even though you can see the international border from Cambodian to Vietnam or from Cambodian to China's closed, but the international trafficking still increasing if we compare to the other previous year that Chab Dai has been work on the forced marriage case to China. So another issue is that why the increasing the forced marriage case to China is that I can see I can tell you that we can say that normal cultural norm for Chinese, because many girl was aborted of many family of Chinese family, because they believe that the son is inheriting the family. So that this is one of the challenges that is the international marriage for China increasing every year. Include of Cambodian girl has been trafficked to China, and Vietnamese girl also have been to China. And you can see the many of the new strand. If we can see the new strand from the previous year, and now they change from in the previous years. Many of the Cambodian girl has been trafficked to China by international flight from the Phnom Penh International Airport to the Siem Reap International Airport. A group of people they trafficked to the China. So please go to the next slide. Yes, you can see the many case brokers as the victim friends, distant relative, neighbor who held their daughter married to a Chinese man. Some broker in the previous they are the victim, but later on they became the broker as well. So we can see this is the way that the Cambodian girl has been trafficked to China, and we can see the for international flight because increasing the trafficking case to China, and Chapdai, one of the civil organization in Cambodian, and we work very close with Cambodian government, and in order to provide the information regarding to the forced marriage to China, in order to strengthen the border strengthen and international flight strengthen whenever they see the Cambodian woman, young Cambodian woman apply to the China, must be very check their passport or visa, how they go and where they go, so that we can see this is a strengthen between the international flight. Because of strengthen international flight, you can see the new strength that the broker used to traffic the Cambodian women to China. They from the flight travel and to the overland travel by use the between the Chinese and Cambodian border and Vietnam border and cross Vietnam and to China. This is the we can use the flight, not do the flight anymore, but used by the transport from the Cambodian to Vietnam and from Vietnam to China. But some girl also across by ride the boat, use the boat from the Vietnam border to Chinese. That is, you can see the new strand of the trafficking cross border between Cambodian to Vietnam and from Vietnam to China. Please go to the next slide. Yes, you can see the broker's trend to communicate with the Cambodian woman. In the previous, the broker used direct communicate with the Cambodian girl, persuading or promising a direct communication with the Cambodian girl. But recently, or last few years and this year, we can see the they not use anymore for direct communicate because they want to protect themselves from the police for investigation, so that they can use the sub-broker. Sub-broker, it means that they direct the people who living in community and very close to the broker, sub-trafficker or trafficker, by phone of communication, or sometimes they use the Facebook in communication, or some they not direct with the survivor or victim, but they can persuading the client family in order to allowing their doctor to the China. That is, you can see the changing of the communication between the brokers and victim. Please go to the next slide. Since the COVID-19 pandemic in Cambodian, we can see the increasing unemployment because has brought the great effect and street to the garment factory workers in Cambodian, and has created a great deal of uncertainty for the estimated 850,000 of Cambodian employed in factory across the country. However, we can see that the 237 factory has suspended their operation across the Cambodian, with an estimated 118,475 workers affected by the COVID-19 affected to Cambodian. So we can see this is unemployment in Cambodian increasing, because unemployment increasing, that the young women are seeking to find a new job in neighboring countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and China. That is that easy for those Cambodian girls trapped into the trafficking, into the forced marriage. And we can see also the increasing the amount of broker since the COVID pandemic in Cambodia, because many of the Cambodian girl who has been married to the Chinese man, and then they became the broker and came to the their community and persuading the many of the Cambodian women who are living in rural area, and then they trap into the trafficking, and we can see the increasing amount of the local broker. And we also had other challenges is that since the COVID-19, we have the limitation of prosecution because when the victim repatriate back to Cambodian, Chapdai work very close with anti-trafficking police, and all victims are required to the case statement and add anti-trafficking police for case statement in order to the investigation to arrest the broker, arrest the offender. So that during the COVID-19 pandemic in Cambodia, most of our clients are not direct interviewed by anti-trafficking police, but we use the online interview by the police. So through the online interview, it is not the good way to identify the trafficking or not trafficking. And otherwise, we can see the some challenging that victims are not really to file the complaint against the offender because they some offender are their relative, and some offender also some victims also treated by the broker. So that this is why the limit of a prosecution, because we have some the challenging in investigation or challenging of the victim identification, and some victim not cooperate with the police for investigation because they also has treated by the broker. And we also have some challenging because of the some victim really want to negotiate with the broker to get the compensation from the prosecutor, sorry, from the perpetrator, so that we can see the limitation of the prosecution through COVID-19 pandemic. And because of the Phnom Penh lockdown and some province are also locked down, so that we can see the many cases that Chapdai has been working and not properly investigate to arrest the broker, so that we can see many cases not pushing to the court yet through since the COVID-19 in Cambodians. Please do the next slide. We can see the some challenging victim of identification issue between Cambodian and China. Cambodian, China is not the signatory sign on the Palermo Protocol, but that's why we have different victim identification between China and Cambodian. So whenever we Cambodian police bill and interview and send the case to the Vietnam for finding the more cooperation between the Cambodian and Vietnam, Cambodian and China, because when those cases are not identified, because China never accept that the Cambodian has been trafficked to China, because many of Cambodian only accuse them as the illegal migration to China, because many Cambodian girls has been detention, sent to detention shelter for a year or for a few months because of illegal migration. They not identify this is trafficking issue. So however, Chapdai, we don't have a challenging of working with the local police, Chinese local police, because Chinese local police also limited understanding the trafficking issue as well. And between Cambodian, Vietnam or Cambodian, China, we doesn't have any the mechanism or guideline for a co-investigation between the three countries whenever we have case, because the flow of the trafficking from Cambodian to Vietnam and from Vietnam to China. So sometimes the Cambodian, while they're traveling from Cambodian to Vietnam and the Vietnam border, police also arrest them and send them back to Cambodian without investigation, without has any the flow of mechanism of reintegration or repatriation back to Cambodian. And also with Chinese government does not have any flow of repatriation. Whenever they arrest the Cambodian girl, they must only deportation the Cambodian girl back to Cambodian without receiving any support, even though the medical help or the whenever they have some not treat well. That is one of the challenging that we have been working on the Cambodian case. And we can see the border of Cambodian and Vietnam is unattended by the both countries to prevent the illegal migration. Many of the Cambodian girls travel across the Vietnam border without the investigation, without the prevention around of thousands and thousands of Cambodian crossing. So that we can say this is one of the challenging for Cambodian and Vietnam. So for us, we just only inform whenever we have some case and inform to Vietnam police, but without corporate of investigation through crossing the border. And we also, for Cambodian, does not has the forced marriage law in place. Whenever we have case, we also have very difficult to identify the forced marriage case. What we can identify, we use only the trafficking law to identify the forced marriage case. That's why we have some difficult for identification of the forced marriage case in Cambodian. The Chinese police are very limited understanding the trafficking cases, as I mentioned earlier, for understanding and of the local Chinese police within of the core working for investigation. So sometimes when we refer the case to the Chinese police, they also said that their citizen also a victim of the work of marrying with the Cambodian woman, because the Chinese men also spend a lot of money to the broker in order to get married with the Cambodian girl. So that sometimes the Chinese police also said that their people also the victim of this process of marriage with Cambodian girls. Please go to the next slide. So for our recommendation for the three country and border strengthening between Cambodia and Vietnam to prevent the illegal migration would be good that has a bilateral meeting between the province near the border between the Vietnam and Cambodian in order to prevent the illegal migration, especially for the Cambodian girl who cross border from Cambodian to Vietnam and from Vietnam to China, and repatriate victim of trafficking and hand over for criminal suspected. Because in the previous year we does not have any mechanism for hand over the criminal suspect to prosecution the broker, Vietnam brokers or the Chinese broker, because many of Cambodian broker are convicted in Cambodian, but some case the Chinese broker also involved trafficking Cambodian girl, but never have any suspect, any the broker of Chinese prosecution in China, only has Cambodian. That's why our suggestion is that should we have the hand over the criminal suspect, provide the training in investigation on transnational crime of trafficking in person and prosecution of victim of trafficking. So that is very important of the provide the training to the border police of Chinese police or Cambodian police or Vietnam police in order has ability to identify the human trafficking case, especially the cross-border trafficking between Cambodian, Vietnam and between Vietnam to China. So I think that it is very important for the border police should be has ability and skill of investigation on the trafficking issue and exchange the information and law related to the trafficking in person. That is very important because we have some challenging of victim identification between Cambodian and China, because China is not adopted for Palermo Protocol for victim identification. So that we have very complicated of identification. So the both country for Cambodian and China should have one law, related law, that we can use the same or similar of victim identification. And partly parties shall not punish the victim for illegal entry to the exit from its territory or any the other offense arising directly from the trafficking in person. So that this is what the chapter has been done through the Cambodian embassy in China, should be not punishment for Cambodian because they are the victim. It's not illegal migration, but a victim, so that we regularly has meeting with Cambodian embassy and subject for this happen in order to provide protect the rights of Cambodian migrant or Cambodian victim who are trafficked to China. And the last one is the person who has been identified as trafficking victim shall be formally repatriated by the three parties in timely manner. So that this is very important between Cambodian, Vietnam, and China should have the formal repatriation or procedure of repatriation in order to provide and protect the rights of the survivor of human trafficking, especially the girl who has been trafficked to China in terms of the forced marriage cases. Thank you for this end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saron, for a really in-depth exploration, and it's great that you also spent some time on responses and recommendations, as we can see that a few of our participants are shaping questions in that direction. Luang, over to you. A quick reminder to please keep to time so that we have some time for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lương Nghệ, the Anti-Trafficking Coordinator at Blue Dragon Children's Foundation. Thank you so much for the global initiative for organizing this event and having me today so that I can share my insights from our work with Vietnamese victims of forced marriage in China. And I really think that Vietnam and Cambodia share the very same situation. So Blue Dragon serves children in crisis throughout Vietnam. The organization has been addressing human trafficking since 2005. While the term human trafficking covers a wide range of crimes, our work is in two specific areas: the trafficking of children into exploitative labor and the trafficking of Vietnamese women and girls into forced marriages in China. To address these issues, we have a team of lawyers, psychologists, and social workers who work closely with law enforcement agencies and communities in Vietnam. Together, we identify cases of trafficking, find the victims and their traffickers, rescue victims, and provide all the necessary services for their successful recovery and reintegration into the community. So as T has already mentioned, China has a significant gender imbalance. Vietnam and China have a border length of nearly 1,500 kilometers. The people of the two countries, especially people in the border areas, have a long history of trade, business, and even family relationship. So taking advantage of these, human traffickers have used different tricks to bring Vietnamese women and girls across the border to sell to Chinese men. According to Vietnamese authorities, 90% of Vietnamese victims are sold abroad, of which about 80% are sold to China. So In the early years of rescuing victims, most of the cases Blue Dragon worked with were trafficked into prostitution establishment. But in the past 8 years, the majority of rescued victims has been sold as wife to Chinese men throughout China. Our recent report, Human Trafficking and Traffickers in Vietnam, shows that 71% of Vietnamese victims were sold into forced marriage with Chinese men. Victims are students or young women from ethnic minorities villages in rural Vietnam, where poverty is rife and very few people are literate. Traffickers target them for work in China, but of course, in fact, sold them as a forced brides. There are also girls and women from anywhere around the country who have been betrayed by traffickers who won their trust by becoming their boyfriends, offering them a hangout. There are also marriage brokers who approach poor families in the Mekong Delta region and persuade the parents to let their daughters marry young and rich Chinese men so that the family can receive a large sum of money as a dowry. However, in most cases, victims are brought across the border illegally without any document. Traffickers can be those who recruit victims and hand them over to organized human trafficking rings in China. Traffickers can also be Vietnamese women who are married to Chinese men, so they know that in their village, there are also Chinese men want to get married. They contact friends or relatives in Vietnam to find and deceive Vietnamese women to bring to China. So what our victims say about their trafficking experience is they are often locked with many other women. There are Chinese men who come to see their face and talk to traffickers about who they want to buy. The victims have absolutely no choice. After being bought, the victims are locked in the house, not allowed to go out, not to use the phone to make sure that they do not run away. They are exploited by their husband and have to soon have children. In many cases, the victims are abused by other male family members. After a while, when they become more obedient or have children, they are allowed to go out, sometimes with supervision, and are exploited for labor. So even some victims tell us that they are forced to work as a prostitute to earn money for her husbands, to make up the money he spent to buy her as his wife. In other cases, victims are wounded or even killed during their escape. So most of the victims will give birth. So it is difficult for them to make a decision whether to return to Vietnam or not. They worry that they cannot bring their children back to Vietnam with them, or they will face a discrimination, stigma, and also economic difficulties when they have to raise their children alone in Vietnam. So in many cases, victims accept a life of exploitation and violence in order to stay and live with their children. So that's the reasons Blue Dragon only can rescue victims when they really want to rescue and call for help. And about the COVID-19 impacts. So the COVID-19 started in 2020 as an organization who directly rescue victims. Blue Dragon experienced immediate difficulties. The travel restrictions and border closures made the rescue work more difficult than ever. However, at the same time, we also received a really high number of calls for rescue, since existing victims experience increased physical and sexual violence by their traffickers or forced husbands. So, for example, in March of 2020 only, our rescue team were in touch with more than 30 victims. One victim calls at midnight we can to the front, we can host her 8-month-old daughter's was crying, and she told to us that I'm sorry, I could not suffer anymore. I could not wait for a rescue, and she decided to take her own life. So fortunately, she was taken to hospital on time and recovered then. And it finally took us more than a year to rescue the mother and daughter back to Vietnam. So, however, we also see some positive aspects of the pandemic prevention measure. As T mentioned in the report, Chinese authority track house to house and identifies many cases of illegal migrant and deported them to Vietnam. So in Vietnam, Blue Dragon work with authority to receive them and try to identify. And among these many victims of human trafficking. So Vietnamese authorities also strengthen the border control, and they have rescued many cases of victims in the process of being trafficked. That's why in 2020 and 2021, Blue Dragon rescued and received a significantly increased numbers of victims. Besides Vietnam victims, we also provided emergency assistance to more than 30 cases of Cambodian victims who were rescued by Vietnamese authorities or Chinese authority when they were trafficked to Vietnam as a transit country. So the trafficking of women and girls from neighboring countries to China to what Chinese men is still a complex issue. And I really agree with Mr. Chan Saron from Chapdai that in addition to the measures to prevent human trafficking in each country, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, we really hope that there will be more international cooperation and initiative cooperation with the Chinese authorities to solve this problem together. Yeah, a very quick and short discussion and presentation, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wang, for bringing to a close our presentations with some really interesting points that have also resonated with some of the points of other speakers. Without further ado, I will move to questions, given that there are many in the chat, which is fantastic. So speakers, please do turn on your videos. We will start by two themes of questions that have come up repeatedly and what the participants are asking. Firstly, why is there not more awareness of this phenomenon? How can awareness be increased? What type of advocacy and lobbying are most promising in order to really push forward the response? And I'm sure all speakers will have a view on this, but perhaps Luang, if I can ask you to take that question in a second, I'll group these. Then we have a number of questions asking about what are the initiatives that are being taken by authorities in Cambodia and China to address this phenomenon already. Perhaps Viriak, if you could come in on that question first, and then Mr. Saron, if you could comment on that as well. And then finally, we had a question around the deportation of Cambodian trafficked victims to transit countries, such in particular Vietnam, that may not be their home country. And a few questions around the process and whether authorities contact the home embassy, what happens if they don't have documentation. T, perhaps you could comment on that, and Luang, also if you could mention from your experience. So first over to Luang to comment on lobbying, advocacy, awareness raising.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. Yes, it's a big issue forced marriage to China for some neighboring countries with China, like Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam, North Korea. Yeah. However, under the Parliament protocol, they mentions forced marriage as a type of exploitation. But in many countries, even in Vietnam, it's not really clear that forced marriage as a type of trafficking. And as Mr. Saron also mentioned that in China and in Vietnam and in Cambodia, there are different internal laws, legal definitions about trafficking. So it's really difficult for us to persuade that forced marriage is a type of trafficking. So, for example, when we receive funds from U.S. Government, because under the U.S. Trafficking Act, they did not recognize forced marriage as a type of trafficking. So, yeah, organizations work on this issue, like Blue Dragon also face difficulties in funds for our work, yeah, to provide support for those victims. So I think at first we should work together, and yeah, really thank for global initiative when we publish this report to target specifically to this issue, so that more people can know about this situation. Yes, and so that we can advocate for law reform in each country, internal laws to include forced marriage as a type of trafficking, and then we can have the international cooperation to address this issue.
Okay, can I add with a bit? Yes, because we can see this challenging with since the COVID-19 pandemic of the international in Cambodia and Vietnam. So we can see the flow of the cross-border trafficking increasing, and young Cambodian girl being trafficked every day to across the Vietnam to China. So I think that both countries, Cambodian government, Vietnam government, or Chinese government should have the bilateral, multilateral meeting how to prevent the case. Especially, I think that border police is the key person should be included in for getting the skill or training on victim identification, because whenever we inform the case to Vietnam or inform to the Vietnam or China, Chinese police does not have any immediately take action on this. So I think that we should is working. Or Chap Dai also has initiated the idea to the Excellency Chu Ban Eng, counter-trafficking committee of Cambodian for the bilateral meeting between Cambodia, Vietnam, and China. So she accept our request for the meeting. So because of COVID-19, we also has suspend the meeting last year and this year. So we plan to have a meeting again in order to provide this information to especially to Chinese government, because right now Chinese government not identified that the victim trafficked to China is the trafficking case or trafficking, even though Vietnam girl or Cambodian girl are not identified as trafficking. What they identify is illegal migration, because when we recruit a lot of Cambodian and then the many of Cambodian sent to the detention shelter, and some Cambodian also pay for fine because they stay for because they entering the China without visa or legal. So that I think the first we should has what mechanism or guideline or MOU between Cambodian and Chinese government. And then when we have the guideline or MOU between the country, it is easy for working between the three countries. For Vietnam and Cambodian, we have the MOU, we signed on MOU for reintegration and repatriation between Cambodian and Vietnam. We can use this guideline in order to work together on the process of reintegration. But sometimes we have only the guideline, but the guideline is not work because we does not have any initiative for the meeting between these countries. Yes.
Thank you very much. Virac, over to you to comment on additional action that authorities are taking to address this phenomenon.
Okay, thank you so much for Luong and Mr. Saron. From my perspective, because it is very grateful if we work together with among the three countries at the regional or not regional, but to focus on the bilateral agreement or MOU. But my suggestion is should work at the ground, like in the not the policy level, but at the technical level for the officer and the local authority for the guideline or policy on the awareness raising about unsafe migration or about the form of the bride trafficking or the identify not so technical, but maybe local government get something from the central government, like the ministry, or from the local government, from the central government to the authority from the district subnational level to include or mainstream the awareness raising of the unsafe migration and trafficking, because mostly we saw that the victim is from the rural area, which sometimes the information or the awareness raising is missing. So, and sometimes the local authority themselves, that sometimes they encourage the people to move out because of the, you see people who married with Chinese, they are rich, and then they come back to persuade, and then sometimes they work with local authority to show that if keep people living in the village, how could they survive without moving to China or moving to other country? So from me, in addition to the national policy or guideline or MOU with the regional, should be focused also the subnational level at the ground or local authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Virayak. T, do you want to comment on the dynamics in Vietnam?
Yeah, yes, sure. So on the question from Sen Nguyen, thanks a lot for your question on the process when the Cambodian traffic victims are deported back to Vietnam. I actually got this information from Blue Dragon and from Leung. So Leung, please feel free to step in and add any comments on this. So usually the traffic victims would either be rescued by the Vietnamese authorities, by the border guards at the border in transit, or they sent back by train by the local Chinese police, especially when they increase their investigation at the beginning of the pandemic, going from house to house and see if people have legal documentations or not. So if they do not, then they would be sent back, deported back to Vietnam. And then the victims, when they are deported back to Vietnam, they would then be referred to the Cambodian embassy in Vietnam, who would then ask Blue Dragon for emergency support, which is to provide accommodation, food and drinks for them for a few days or a week or a few weeks even, depending on the length of the investigation from the police side. And then the Cambodian embassy would arrange transportation for the victims to go back home to Cambodia by train. And there they would receive support from Chap Dai in Cambodia. So it is also worth noting that Blue Dragon has also an MOU with both Chap Dai, stating that if there's a Cambodian victim referred to Vietnam, then Blue Dragon would provide emergency support, and then Chap Dai would take them home and provide reintegration support services for them back in Cambodia. So Blue Dragon, the Hanoi-based NGO in Vietnam, also works closely with both the Cambodian embassy in Hanoi, who organize transportation and so on, and with the Cambodian NGO Chap Dai. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Thanks, Lucia.
Thank you very much, T. I'm afraid we're coming to a close. We're aware that there are a few questions that are unanswered. Perhaps if the speakers could share their email addresses in the chat so that participants can get in touch directly with any unanswered questions. I think a theme that also came out of the questions that we haven't addressed is there insufficient focus on both in terms of the responses that are being discussed and in terms of the coverage on dynamics within China, and not just in the transit countries and in Cambodia. There is definitely a risk that is happening. We would note that and this is explored further in the report, that partly due to COVID and partly due to scope, the research very much focused on dynamics in Cambodia, and therefore the recommendations are targeted at stakeholders in Cambodia. That is not to say that addressing demand from employers, from husbands or families is not an absolutely pivotal element of the response, as you rightly hint at, Sam McCormack. But it was not to the same extent the focus of the recommendations, because there was insufficient engagement with stakeholders in China to really flesh out the detail around those. In terms of money transfer, like financial payments for dowries, these payments were in many cases done via money transfer services, often a while after the initial movement of the woman or the girl from Cambodia, sometimes following marriage, as well as sometimes the payments were made in cash. In the examples that we explored in our research, we did not find any examples of forced marriage that didn't have an element of forced sexual exploitation or forced childbearing as part of it. There may well be examples, but they did not feature in the examples that we came across as part of our research. I would just like to reiterate thank you to all our speakers for really interesting inputs and for trying to move the conversation forwards. I think that it's clear from a lot of the tone of the questions that has been asked by participants that there is an understanding within a small group of the scale of this phenomenon and the challenge that it really poses, but that there's real difficulties in expanding that awareness, as has been mentioned by our speakers, partly due to the ongoing difficulties in recognizing forced marriage dynamics as a form of trafficking. Something that we pick up on in our report is that some research studies have suggested the term demi-trafficking to recognize this blurred status, and we would perhaps suggest avoiding that term because it really does fall centrally within the idea of trafficking and within the crimes that the trafficking legislation and anti-trafficking efforts are trying to stop. And this ongoing failure to recognize forced marriages as one very important form of exploitation is creating a huge challenge in terms of responses, as we've heard from our speakers. So thank you very much to all our participants and audience members. We really do encourage you to have a read of the report on the Global Initiative website and to get in touch with the speakers with any questions that you feel have been left unanswered. We thank you for joining us today for this really important discussion, and we look forward to continuing engaging with many of you in the near future. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.